So without further ado, let's say hello to the legend, the natural, Randy Couture. There he is. Randy, how are you, my friend? Long time no see.
Good, Errol. How are you, bud? Great to see you. Thanks for having me on.
Oh, it's always great. It's always an honor, a privilege to talk to you. First, before we get into all the business stuff, you know, we recall a couple years ago the heart issue. Are you all good? Everything good? You know, in the aftermath of that?
Yeah, 100%. Absolutely, 100%. Genetic issue. I have very thick blood. Have to stay on top of that and keep dumping blood. Unfortunately, I was stationed in Germany in the 80s. They won't take my blood at a blood bank, so I have to use a phlebotomist and keep my blood level normal. So other than that, I'm 100% cleared. I can do whatever I want. I've been training. I've been, obviously just finished Expendables 4, in the middle of the Bell Keeper right now. That's hence the crazy beard. But all 100% cleared physically. Absolutely.
Okay. That is great to hear. And that's crazy about Germany because you were born in Germany, or like, why won't they take your blood?
No, I was stationed over there. I was stationed over there in the Army for years.
Why won't they take your blood?
In the 80s. Could have been exposed to mad cow, and I guess they don't have a test for that. So they don't want to put my blood into the blood pool if there's potential for mad cow being there, which I think would have showed up by now.
Yeah, but, it's like 40 years.
Evidently, they don't have a test to determine whether you've been exposed to that or not. So they just won't take the blood.
Wow, that is fascinating. Okay, so like I said before you came on, I was thinking about you and your story a lot, and there are a lot of new fans, and a lot of fans don't remember 2007. But I'm wondering for you, and there's many different interesting angles and connections to this story. Of course, Francis trains at Xtreme Couture, for goodness sake. But when you were seeing all of this play out, did it remind you of what you went through back in 2007?
Yes, it seemed very familiar to me, and obviously, I think you had Jake Paul on today's show as well. Here's a guy who's become very famous on YouTube and doing these crossover fights from MMA to boxing. It's interesting the opponents he chooses to pick. But if it takes somebody who is going to run their mouth and do all these extracurricular activities to poke Dana White and shine a light on the disparaging difference between pay in boxing and pay in mixed martial arts, then I'll get behind a guy like Jake Paul. I'm not a fan of the publicity stunts and all that other stuff. As I think most people know, my style was, to let my talking happen in the cage. But I think this is something that's important. Fighters deserve a transparent marketplace where they can figure out what their value is in the marketplace and negotiate a fair deal and get their fair share of the revenues that come in from each and every event in our sport. And that's not happening at this point.
I'm curious if you have a relationship with Francis and if in this process he has asked you about what you went through and your take on what he is going through.
Yeah, I'm obviously part of the team, albeit a smaller part of the team these days because of my schedule. But I've talked to Eric Nixick and Dennis Davis and Ryan and see Dewey Cooper in there all the time. Got on the mat a couple of times in the last couple of years with Francis as he's working on his wrestling skills and trying to help him a little bit. I've talked more to Eric about the situation than I have Francis personally, but it's a very similar situation. I wasn't happy with the contract, how restricted they are. Obviously, a big fight for me was trying to find a way to make the Fedor Emelianenko fight happen, which caused a major rift in the relationship with myself and Zuffa. They weren't being forthright and honest about the pay, about what I was being paid, about the use of independent contractor contracts outside the public purview, the contract that goes through the athletic commissions. There's a lot of ways they use their money to keep those top echelon guys. And I was fortunate enough to be one of those top echelon guys for a little while, to keep them quiet, to keep them happy by feeding them money under the table that doesn't show up in the public purview. Obviously, the company wasn't very happy with me when I highlighted some of this stuff back in 06 and 07 and the way fighters were being treated, signing away their ancillary rights and a whole bunch of different things. I noticed all those action figures you have up there on your count. A lot of those fighters would not be able to do those action figures if they didn't have their ancillary rights, or they'd have to get the UFC's permission to be able to do them, which of course is we're going to require the UFC to get their little piece of that. I wrote a book, all these things that I was able to do, transitioning to film and all this other stuff, because I fought for my ancillary rights. And a lot of the guys back then didn't even understand, nor did I. I had management at that time, Sam Spira, Jeremy Lappin, Peter Levin, guys that educated me on what an ancillary right was. I've been a wrestler my whole life. I wasn't exactly entrenched in the business world or the entertainment world. So knowing what that contract held, what a championship clause is, a lot of these clauses, and this is a 17-page contract that's a nightmare. I mean, and this doesn't even compare to the one they're making these guys sign, that the Ultimate Fighter, obviously involved in the first 4 seasons of the Ultimate Fighter, and had several of my athletes, Nate Corey, Chris Lieben, others that signed those contracts. And you want to see a horrible contract, a one-sided mess, take a look at one of those contracts. It's pretty horrible, but we want to fight. This is what we love to do. And we're willing to give up some of those things in order to do what we love to do.
Are you surprised that, again, I rewatched that press conference a few days ago, and it's amazing. If the footage is a little grainier, but you tell me that press conference is happening in 2021, 2022, and I believe you. It's a lot of the same stuff that are still being discussed. Are you surprised that this is still the same stuff that is, plaguing the fighters?
Yeah, I think that in my mind, it seems like an easy thing for us to do is organize and unite. And as a united front, we as fighters are the commodity. Without fighters, there is no show. But fighters are very egocentric. That's what makes us good at what we do. We don't sometimes look at the big picture. We don't recognize that we're building brands every time we step up in that cage. These are light bulbs that went off for me as I was progressing through my career, and recognizing that I had an opportunity in a very short window to make this kind of money, and I had to take care of that money and make sure I could propagate, this brand that I'm building while I'm able physically to walk up in that cage and do what we do. That's going to carry me down the road and allow me some existence, not getting punched in the face after I retire, after I walk away from the sport. And I think that's what it boils down to is the fighters are very egocentric. They don't look at the big picture sometimes. They don't see themselves that way. A lot of times we're arrogant, honestly. We think, oh, it'll never happen to me. And unfortunately, it is going to happen to a lot of us if we don't take care of this opportunity and this window that we have.
I know this is somewhat of a broad question, but I'd love, what is your take on the Francis situation right now? What your assessment of how this is playing out, your take on how he's handling it, how they're handling it. It's the main difference, I think, between his situation and yours is you had 2 fights left on your deal when you made that, announcement. He doesn't, but he has the Champions Clause, but he says that the term is going to end at the end of this year. I recall saying at the press conference that you had, I think 9 months left on your term, or maybe it was 18 months, something like that. They disputed that, but those 2 fights, I think, were a big difference, right? So your assessment of what's going on with him right now.
Well, it's interesting that they let him fight out his contract, because in essence, it gives him some leverage. If they want to keep their heavyweight champion, they're going to have to give some ground. They're going to have to give him some things in this contract. Otherwise, he's going to be a free agent and able to go and fight wherever he wants to. Go to Bellator, go to PFL, go wherever he wants to go. And they lose their current heavyweight champion, which is a kind of a big black eye, in my opinion, to them. So now they've let him have this power by letting him fight his contract out and not forcing him to negotiate a new deal. The Champions Clause was only going to take them so far. That's an automatic clause. If he's the champ, when his term ends, they can extend his contract for a year. And I think there's probably a couple of fights, 2 or 3 fights left in that, added in that Champions Clause. So, and then, it becomes determining when that clock started. When he signed that contract, did the clock start, or did it start when he fought that first fight, which was probably a number of months after that? That's for legal teams and lawyers and adjudicators to figure out, and that's the problem. These guys have endless, well, not endless, but a lot of money. They'll drag Francis into court and try and bleed him of the money that he has accrued through his fighting. And at some point, you have to make a decision on what you want to do. This is what happened with me. I was fighting to try and make that Fedor fight happen, spending a lot of my own money fighting the injunctions and the things they were trying to do to keep me from executing what I saw in the language of the contract and be able to go somewhere else and make the fight happen, because they couldn't come to terms with M1 Global, who was kind of representing Fedor. And Francis is going to find himself in a very similar situation. If he tries to walk away and say the contract ended here, they're going to contest that. They're going to drag him into court, going to force him to spend a bunch of money on lawyers and stuff that he's not going to want to do. And he's going to have to, at some point, really make a decision, unfortunately, whether he wants to walk back, stop spending money on lawyers and legal issues and go back to doing what he loves to do, which is fight. And it's a shame to be in that situation.
Is that ultimately why you came back and took the Brock Lesnar fight, just because you were bleeding money and couldn't keep
Absolutely.
up with it? Do you regret that?
Absolutely. No, I wanted to fight. At the end of the day, I'm a fighter. Yes, I wanted to take a stand for myself, for my family, for what was best in my financial interest, in my future. And I wanted to be considered the number one athlete in the world, and that meant fighting Fedor Emelianenko. Everyone had him ranked as 1 and me as 2. As a fighter, that's the guy I want to fight. And I'm sure Francis would feel the same way. At the end of the day, we're fighters. This is what we love. This is our passion. We want to be able to do this. But what's fair is to create some transparency in this sport, gain the protections of the Muhammad Ali Act. That's why boxers have the transparency and know their market value and can negotiate the fair price in the marketplace for what's going on. Why guys like Floyd Mayweather make, hundreds of millions of dollars off of one fight. Guy like Jake Paul can make more money in one of those crossover boxing matches than any mixed martial artist has ever made. That's not fair. That's not real. Now, let's be honest. The world isn't fair. So it's up to us as fighters to unite, to come together. The MMAFA I've been a voice for them and working with them for a long time to get the Ali Act amended. Obviously, there's a core group of those guys in the MMAFA that are named plaintiffs in the class action suit against the UFC for their business practices. That's another potential way, a longer play, certainly to get the business practices changed and create the transparency that we all want.
Wanted to play you a clip from that press conference back in, when's the last time you saw it, by the way? When's the last time you watched this?
I saw it when it happened, honestly.
Really, it's amazing. It's a real...
It's one of those things that...
It takes you back, right? I mean, you don't really want to relive it.
It was a tough time. There was a lot going on for me at that time, between marital issues at that time and then wanting to continue to pursue my craft as the clock was ticking. I mean, I was 44 years old, coming to the end, seeing the light at the end of the tunnel in my ability to compete at that level. So there was a lot going on for me at that time, for sure.
So when I rewatched it, because Francis was on my show last Monday, and it was a very revealing and honest interview, I thought, and I give him a lot of props for his courage to speak up like this, because you know how tough it is when you're the UFC heavyweight champion. I mean, there's a lot riding on that. Anyway, he said something, and then I watched your press conference. I was like, wow, this is exactly what Francis said. This is what you said back in November of 2007.
Everybody's trying to make a big deal out of the money, and this was never a money issue. It's been a prevailing feeling of respect that wasn't being given. For 11 years of my life, I've spent trying to represent this sport with integrity, represent this sport in a particular way for the owners before and the owners now. And I've never felt like that was appreciated.
He almost said the same thing verbatim, because I asked him, what's the number? What's the price? And he said, it's not about the price. It's about the respect. It's about the freedom. It's about those things in the contract. And so I was wondering if maybe this came from your conversations with him, or if it's just really the same story being told all over again, except this time he doesn't have fights left as opposed to you having 2 fights left.
Yeah. No, I just think it's the same story. I haven't had this conversation with Francis. Like I said, I've talked to Eric, and obviously I'm well aware of the situation that Francis finds himself in. I see the similarities and the parallels for sure from what was going on with me back then. And I just don't think it's changed. I haven't had an honest conversation with Francis about all of this. I have talked to Eric and Francis's team about it.
Yeah.
So some of that information may have been disseminated to Francis, but I haven't directly talked to him. So what he said, it came from his heart and how he feels.
I don't know if you saw last week, but he said that when they were on their way to the arena, he fought, 2 Saturdays ago, his team was sent an email, a subpoena essentially, that, they're having these talks, allegedly, according to the UFC, and, like a lawyer letter. I don't know the technical term, but it was like literally as they're going to the arena, which to me doesn't seem like the best time to do something like that as your athlete's about to fight. But I know how this business goes. Were you surprised when you heard that they did that?
Honestly, I wasn't surprised. This is classic Zuffa and Dana White. At the end of the day, they don't want Francis to have that power. They would have been much happier if Francis would have lost that fight. I think that's what they expected to happen. And I think Dana White can say whatever he wants, but he didn't show up in that cage to put that belt around his heavyweight champion. He didn't show up to the post-fight press conference. And there's a reason for that. And he can say whatever he wants, but it's because he was sincerely hoping that Francis would not win that fight and he wouldn't have to deal with Francis. He would see Francis being cut right now, but Francis is still the champ and still holding that strap. They got to deal with him.
If you could play back 2007, 2008, is there something that you wish you would have done differently? I just asked you if you regretted coming back. You said, no, you're a fighter. But was there something earlier in the process you wish you would have, zigged instead of zagged?
No, I think everything unfolded and happened the way it happened. There's, and that's usually the way it goes. Yeah, it would have been nicer to see fighters get behind me in that push to change the contracts. That was the downside. I raised hell and created a problem for them, and the ramifications of that were they closed a lot of the loopholes that I pointed out in how I saw the contract, and the contracts became worse after me opening my mouth, which I was trying to do what was best for me. I didn't get any support from any of the other fighters. I think if we'd united then, we might not be in the situation we're in now. We may have, been able to create a fighters association, create some minimum standards and minimum, minimums for us as fighters, healthcare, retirement packages, a lot of the things that professional athletes and a lot of other sports enjoy, but that didn't happen. So here we are, 14 years later, and we're still talking about the same issues.
Do you have any hope that the UFC fighters will ever create an association like this, to have a seat at the table, to have a collective voice, to have a pension, to have that health care? Do you foresee that? Because I have to be honest, there have been time, and the MMAFA, which does a great job, which I know you're a part of, is a little bit different, right? It's not like trying to get the UFC fighters together who are under contract right now and the retired fighters.
Yeah.
I have lost hope that this is going to happen. I don't necessarily blame the fighters. I know it's tough to speak out when you're working for someone you don't want to get blackballed. It's an easy thing for me to talk about.
Yeah.
I feel for them. I really do. Do you think this comes in the next 5, 10, 15, 20 years?
Yes, I do. I think one way or the other, we're going to continue to push and try and get that transparency that we're all looking for. And I think there's a couple ways that happens. I think, yes, the Fighters Association makes a lot of sense. We're all 1099 independent contractors, so union model doesn't work. And you can look up on the MMAFA website today. I believe Rob Macy posted why the union model doesn't work for mixed martial arts and for fighters today. And it's a very, very good in-depth explanation of what does work and what won't work and why it won't work. But I think there's the MMAFA coming together, or a Fighters Association coming together for the sport, not just the UFC, across the board. We unite, we create some minimum criteria for the way fighters are paid and treated. We try to create that transparency that is in boxing, exists because of the Muhammad Ali Act that was formed in 1996 to protect boxers from promoters like Bob Arum and Don King, because fighters were being taken advantage of pretty severely in boxing. And, everybody hates to see those horror stories where these champions in their sport were now down and out, broke, no money, didn't take care of those funds when they had the opportunity to, and literally going to these crazy autograph signings and stuff just to make ends meet. It's a horrific thing to watch. but it's the reality of the situation. So I think there's obviously the Ollie Act being amended is the other thing. The class action lawsuit is the longer play. You know, I think they've done all the affidavits. They've been classified or designated as a class. That's probably going to take another couple years to unwind that, but that will force the UFC at least to change their business practices if that's successful. Getting the Ollie Act amended is a shorter play. It's a no-brainer. Why shouldn't we enjoy the same transparency and lack of restrictive contracts that boxers enjoy and have enjoyed since they were protected by that federal legislation? In all the other combative sports, not just MMA, there's a lot of grappling tournaments and a lot of pay-per-view grappling and different other individual combative sports that could use that protection under the Muhammad Ali Act as well. That's a shorter play and certainly something that I see happening sooner or later. So there's three ways there: the class action, the amendment to the Ali Act, and just us as fighters on the front lines. And it takes guys like Francis, those top tier guys that are, have the potential to make those six-figure contracts in fighting. There aren't very many of them. But if those guys are willing to put that on the line to change the sport, and we unite as a group of fighters and develop and demand these minimum criteria, then I think the sport changes, and for the better for the athletes.
You have actually gone to Washington. You have, put your money where your mouth is. You've gone on the front lines. Why? Like, it's crazy to me that there's this thing called the Muhammad Ali Act for boxing, and they completely ignore MMA, and there's no push right now, it seems, within Washington to help the MMA fighters, when this sport is just as mainstream, if not more mainstream than boxing at this point. It's on ESPN. It's on every freaking channel. What was I know this was several years ago now, and there was a different president who was friends with the president of the UFC, and that might have made things a little bit tricky as well. The sentiment that you got when you were over there, why is there no sort of, rush, like any sort of need or push to make this happen?
The truth is we had over 60 sponsors for the amendment, HR 44, which is the amendment to the Muhammad Ali Act, and basically changing the definition from boxing to combative sports athlete. And then there's some things that are indigenous to boxing that would have to be reworded too, because they talk about rounds and things like that. And obviously the rounds in our sport and other combative sports are different than they are in boxing. But it's a very simple thing to change. And the UFC, at last count, had spent about $3 million lobbying against getting the Muhammad Ali Act amended. They got it thrown out of energy and commerce, thrown into education. Now, I thought that was a great job by the lobbyists. We were almost ready for a vote and to get it voted in Congress, and then it would go to Senate to be passed after that. You got it thrown out of that committee and thrown over to Education, the Education Committee. So basically, we had to start all over again with the sponsors and the door knocking on all the other stuff we did. I didn't realize that part of the Muhammad Ali Act in its original form went through Education, the Education Committee. I thought they were just stonewalling us, getting us thrown out of Energy and Commerce. Both of those committees are the committees that passed the original Muhammad Ali Act. So it's going to take both of those committees to amend that federal legislation. I think we'll get there, but I think we're going to continue to push and continue to unite as fighters. Obviously getting the amendment is the shorter play. Uniting as fighters is the short play. We could do that within a year, create, health insurance for these guys, same as USA Wrestling does, or any of the other national governing bodies. Those athletes, by getting that membership card, have a minimal insurance that covers them in that card from training and competing and getting injured. Just that alone, I think, would unite a lot of the fighters, because most of us don't have any kind of insurance. So there are a couple ways this goes down, but I think it's going to go down at some point.
How do you think the situation with Francis plays out? I mean, if you could look into a crystal ball, what are you predicting?
I think at the end of the day, Francis is a fighter. He wants to fight. He's had a very interesting story coming all the way from Sierra Leone through Paris and making his way to the U.S., literally homeless on a couple of occasions. And now here he is at the top of the heap and the best, pound for pound, one of the best fighters in the world, certainly the heavyweight division. is paying notice to Francis. So at the end of the day, I think that's what he wants to do. I don't think he wants to get involved in all this legal crap and all of that. But at the end of the day, right is right. And he's willing to stand up and use his voice. I don't see him giving in. It's going to be interesting how it plays out. I know, like I said, they're going to drag him into court, trying to get him to spend as much money as they can get him to spend and put that pressure on him that way and get him to fold, get him to give it up and just go back to fighting. It'll be interesting to see how it plays out.
Two last things, and I'll let you go. Again, thank you for the time, the insight. It's, you're a legend, and, we appreciate you very much. I was going to ask, does it bother you? I spoke to Rampage about this recently, and I was asking if it, you butt heads with the big promotion and you kind of get forgotten about. And I think MMA does the worst job of any sport of honoring its legends, of bringing you guys out. And I know it's different in your situation, but does it annoy you? Does it bother you? Does it hurt you that if you butt heads with these guys, you're essentially forgotten about? You're erased from the history books. Tito said this recently in his situation, obviously a very tricky one too, but it does feel as time goes on, the people who made this sport what it is, the ones who were fighting when there was no money at all in random places, aren't honored like they should be honored. And as sports like baseball and basketball and football, who bring out the legends all the time to the big events, we see that all the time. It doesn't happen in our sport. And that bothers me. I'm wondering if it bothers you.
I'm so focused on all the other stuff that I have going on that's positive in my life. I don't have time to dwell on those nitpicky little negative things. Yeah, the stats are the stats, and they've been whitewashed from the record books. If you're going to see a highlight reel, it's probably of me getting punched or kicked in the face. It's not going to be a glorious situation where I'm winning a fight or getting a belt put around my waist. That's just how it is. That's how they play. They've done it to Chuck, Tito. You could almost go down the list. You mentioned Rampage. Anybody who's chirped, anybody who's and tried to buck the system a little bit and try to get a little bit for themselves is squashed and whitewashed from everything that they can be. So it's just the way it is. It doesn't bother me. Yeah, I don't, it's not fair, but like we said already, life isn't fair. That's the way the world works sometimes.
And lastly, on a positive note, what about the state of Xtreme Couture? I couldn't be a bigger fan of Eric Nicksick. I love the way he conducts himself, the way he is so loyal to his fighters and the whole team over there. I know your son's still very much involved, but we've seen from the opening of the gym, the gym has gone through some ups and downs. Right now, it's enjoying a great up.
Absolutely.
How do you feel about what's going on at the gym, and in particular the work of the head coach, Eric Nicksick?
Well, Eric's an amazing guy. Here's a guy that came from a football background, had a father as a coach and learned a lot, was paying attention and has translated a lot of that coaching knowledge. Although all football is a combative sport. It's not in the same realm as MMA, but he's just done an amazing job of running a tight ship, creating that family atmosphere in there. Cause that's what we are, a big family. Dennis Davis, an amazing job as a coach, the amateur team and the group that he works with and all the fighters that he works with as well. And then obviously Ryan, my son, is running the gym now. I signed the gym over to him last year and he's just done a great job dealing with COVID and all the other restrictions and everything else going on and keeping the team together. They've created a new atmosphere in there and that new fighter's world that guys can flourish. You can come to Xtreme Couture. It's a great facility. You got great coaching, great partners, and you have the ability to flourish there. And I think Francis, Misha, so many other athletes do such a great job in there, and they highlight what we're all about. And I'm very proud of them.
Great to hear that. And congrats to the entire team and to you on all the success. Thank you for the time as always, Randy. Next movie that's coming out, which is it?
Coming out? That's a good question. The post-production process is a night.
Be like a year later.
It'll probably be a year later for Expendables 4, I'm sure. The Bell Keepers, the kind of supernatural thriller I'm working on right now, and that'll be done here in a couple of weeks. But how long it takes them to turn around,
right,
and get EG and the color correct and the sound and all that stuff lined out so they can put it out is another question. So I don't know which one will be coming out next. I had a very busy year, 5 movies last year.
Wow.
And I'm looking at 3 more this year. So definitely more than I've ever done and having a blast doing it.
PFL again this year?
Yes, sir. Absolutely. They added 8 shows. The Contender Series starts up February 18th. 8 weeks in a row, we'll give out 8 new contracts or developmental contracts for the next season of the PFL, which starts in April.
I love it. I love it. Randy, thank you for the time. Appreciate your insight as always. Thanks for all that you do for the fighters and still fighting for them. It's very appreciated here, and I really appreciate you coming on in the midst of filming another movie. So much respect, my friend, and we'll talk to you soon.
Thanks, Ariel. Appreciate you, man. Be well.
All right, there he is. Wow, what a legend. It's always an honor for me. I know there are a lot of new fans, but please, please understand when I tell you that guy, I mean, the stuff that guys like Randy did, the stuff that he went through, the battles that he fought, putting himself out there. Go type in Randy Couture press conference on YouTube.